and welcome to D10tion, where we pretend to know what we're talking about when it comes to D&D. I am your host, folk hero Tristan. To my right, we have Haunted One Sam, and to my left, we have Urchin Brandon.
Fair. I'll give you that one.
So today we're talking about backgrounds. And by backgrounds, we're going to talk about coming up and building a background as well as incorporating it into a character, which is why I've given us each a background.
Dun, dun, dun.
So as you're building a character, a background is almost, I would say, essential to a character. If you're looking to create a deep and actually role-playable character with meaning.
Yeah, you need one of those. You need background that leads into a backstory.
Yeah.
So you're not just like, I'm into the world now. I exist. I was born 32 years old.
I mean, maybe that is your background.
We'll get into that, but not really.
You're a warforged that was created, and you're like, what is life? That's your background. You were born.
Most people don't have that happen. You can't use that if most people don't go through that.
All right. So with backgrounds, we're talking about if you're using something like D&D Beyond or Player's Handbook and stuff, there are ones that are already there, like classic ones like Alkalite and other
the
one.
Courtier or Criminal Spy,
Right,
or
Gladiator, Knight,
Charlatan,
So
Entertainer.
so there's definitely ones that are great for, if you're looking for references, definitely those. But there is the option to create your own, and there's constantly more that come out. So background is a very fluid thing. So if you're trying to come up with your background, there's a number of ways you could really do it. If you're struggling to come up with one, like you've built a character, you're just like, I don't know what to do with them, one of the pre-made ones are great. And one way that you can also do it is, as Sam likes to put it, just have an idea to start with. And it really depends on how you make a character. Do you start with what seems cool and as you go through? Do you start with, I want to play this race? Do I want to start with playing this class? Or do I want to start with a story that I have in my head?
And if you're really struggling, like worst case scenario, talk to your DM. When we started playing this campaign, I had zero idea for background. I actually just let Brandon run wild with it, and it has come back to bite me in the ass in so many ways. But
Next campaign, they'll be ready.
But it's been a lot of fun. And I've gotten a lot better at building backgrounds since then, so I won't have to do that again, unfortunately.
Right, and this is where, if you already have, a backstory, if you're, like I've said with Sam saying, if you have an idea, having a backstory is already a great way, because then you can just create a background that leads into it.
Yeah.
And this is where, you have the ability to build them up on your own that works. Like, for example, for your campaign, Sam, Mythos and Mayhem, I'm playing, an Earth Genasi, and I was like, well, none of these backgrounds really work for what I would want his background to be, which was he was essentially a stonecutter. He was a mason.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a background, so you had to make one,
Yeah.
and it was one of those things where it worked because with a lot of these backgrounds, you tend to get benefits or certain things that work towards your character.
Yeah, you'll get proficiencies because of the background, or tools, or
Because we've worked with it, or it's how you get to the background.
Right.
Like that.
So, for example, the very first one, Acolyte, just as an example.
It's a classic one for clerics.
Right. Because you spent your life in service of a temple or a specific god or a pantheon of gods. You act as an in-between between the realm and the holy, and then, everything like that. So, essentially, yeah, it's an acolyte. But because of that, you have skill proficiency in insight or religion. You also then get 2 more languages of your choice. You get, in your equipment, you can have a holy symbol and a couple of other things that deal with it. As well as you get a feature that you get the Shelter of the Faithful. This is where you can essentially go to a place and you're like,
find a church, and there it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And then this is where you'll also get personality traits as far as your personality traits, your ideals, your bonds, your flaws, and stuff like that are based upon your background. So that's just kind of a general kind of idea of what happens when you pick a background. So if you were making one, as far as let's say the masonry for my character, it was just you've spent your life working with stone. You've carved it, you've sold it, blah blah blah. So I'd get
rock.
Right. So I might get skill proficiencies and performance when it comes to dealing with it, or sleight of hand, depending on how your DMing would be. Or
I think I gave you Mason's tools, and then I think I also gave you advantage on survival checks when dealing with rock.
Right, or history when it came to the same things. Since my character had spent his life working with different art styles with stone, if I walk to a temple, I may be like, that is an ancient form of blah 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 blah. I've seen that before. It's like, oh crap, you know that. And stuff like that. And then characteristics might come down to like, as far as like, oh, you see, stone art is higher than anything else, but any form of art's great because you're essentially an artist, or you might get proficiencies with persuading about stuff like that. And that's like the two spectrums of picking one and then like make because again I had the idea of him being a masonry, and you're like, okay, let's make a background that would reflect that. Yeah. And of course, this is where you definitely want to make sure that you have a balance if you're going to make one. We'll talk about this more when we talk about homebrew stuff. There's always should be a balance. If you make it broken, that's not a good idea.
You're a bad person.
Yeah.
You're trying to mess with your DM.
Or your DM's messing
Or your
with you.
DM's messing with you. So there are those big things are kind of how like every single background will have some sort of proficiency, some sort of thing they give you, some sort of reason why you're that. Some have languages, some don't, and then a feature. Those are the big things. Every background will have it. If you're making your own, that's how pretty much the backbone is that. But there are different sections of backgrounds that make sense for what you're playing. So if you're playing a rogue urchin is an easy one because it's a social one that makes sense for you, being on the outskirts of, society. It's also utility and a deception one, so that plays really into a rogue.
Right.
There's things like social, exploration, combat, utility, deception, clan, guild. These are all things that if you're thinking about where you are and where your character comes from, that's how you build it. Like, let's say you're not on Ravnica, which is a plane of existence that came into being earlier this year.
Yeah.
That there are different, guilds like Boros and Rakdos. It wouldn't make sense if you're on the material plane where those guilds don't exist for you to have that background.
Yeah.
Right.
You wouldn't be a Rakdos cultist if there's no such thing as Rakdos.
Right.
I'm a Rakdos cultist. Everyone goes, a what?
Now, this is also where you could use some of these backgrounds as similar of a way. Like, for example, you have criminal/spy. It's the same kind of like, they have the same basic moveset, but it just depends on how they use it. You could have the same, skill set as a criminal, but you're a good criminal? Like, someone who uses that
Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Right. It could be like something like Robin Hood, or you're a spy, but you're a spy for good people, so you'd have the same, essentially moveset as someone else who like that. Or, even something like entertainer. It would just depend on how you're using that entertainment. Like, are you a performer as far as music, speech, or even, the first thing that comes to mind is like you're going to have your typical bard, or then like my barbarians are going to play very different music, but they're both, their background would be entertainer.
Yeah. Or maybe you take that as a as a spy or as a rogue, using that performance to enhance your deception.
Right. So you could just, it's one of those things where you were an entertainer and a rogue, and you used that skill set to your advantage.
Swindled everyone.
Right. And this is where you can also use some of these backgrounds to build upon. And I go back to the barbarian. I could do entertainer, but then I could go in there and tweak it and go, okay, it's a very specific type of entertainer, where like maybe I do make it so like they're heavy metal bards, where for the most part I won't get advantage, but if I go into an area where it's a bit more appropriate, it excels dramatically, and I have extra bonuses to this. But if I'm in a high value area, like we're the noble area, and they go in there, they're gonna get like disadvantage on things.
So it all depends on what you're trying to make in, like, how it makes sense.
Right.
That's very important. And then from there, figuring out what backgrounds fit. And then if you want, finding a feature or a skill set and things like that assist whatever your backstory is.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can make a backstory first and then find a background, or you can make a background and then make a backstory if it's easier. Because if you're finding a background and you're like, I like hermit. Okay? That's a very specific thing that you can now tailor a backstory to fit how you're a hermit, and then give your DM a little bit more to work with. And then you also have, your own feature that you have that no one else has in your party, so then you can make an interesting character.
Right.
So, like, that's how I do it. Whenever I'm trying to think of a backstory, I go to the backgrounds if I'm going to use a made one or I'm going to make one, and then work from there to make sense why they have that background or why they have the feature. If you want, just look at the features and see what feature stands out and see if that makes sense.
Of course, you can always do what I do, which is I usually think of what the backstory is first and then see if there's already a pre-made background that works for it.
That's a
and
great
if
way
not,
to do it.
then I can sort of tweak one, or, obviously if I'm a player in that sense, then I'll talk to my DM about it. Or if I'm the DM, then the power is mine. It's kind of
make
tweak
whatever I
things.
want.
Yeah. For example, like Chet, my backup character for whenever Cal dies. I kind of wanted him to be like this, like old Western town boy, like a ranch hand, like type of guy. So that was what he was when he was growing up. So I made the ranch hand background thing,
Right.
like because that's what I wanted, basically.
I mean, yeah, it's really one of those things where backgrounds can really depend on if you're trying to pick a background. It's either A, you just don't have an idea and you're looking for something for inspiration to help kind of spark your imagination, or you have a story and trying to find one that works best. Now, it should be said that, especially if you're using something like D&D Beyond, homebrew is a great thing because 9 times out of 10, someone else has had an idea at least somewhat similar to yours. If you're like, man, they don't have a background that like they don't have an orphaned background. I really want my background to be orphaned for this character. Go into homebrew, I bet
A sad background.
it is, but if you're building a character,
Isn't that like all of D&D PC's
yes,
backgrounds
exactly.
at one point? Like,
if you orphaned or your
it's like the
parents have to
Disney
hate you.
phenomena where one of your parents or both your parents are dead. Like,
Yes. So I mean, just typing like orphan, background into homebrew.
Yeah.
Not you're most likely going to find someone that pops up. I mean, because I know I've looked for certain things, and there's some that match very well, and I'm just like, it's close, and you just send a copy, and then you tweak it, and you're like, okay, this fits more of what I wanted out of it. And of course, you're going to want to run it all through your DM in the end. If you're like, hey, I want this character to have this kind of background. Is this okay with you with these perks and skills? Or, is any of this that feel like it's too much or too little? And, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where I guess what I should say is, this is not who your character is now, per se. Especially depending on how long you've been playing. Characters have growth and character arcs and things like that. So you very much could have started as a character who was his background as an urchin. But now they are part of a successful group. They're doing things. You might still have those perks of things like with Urchin, because I think with
You'll never outgrow them. You will
Right.
You will always have whatever information or school set or however you learned. You will always have the abilities and things that you learned in the past, like with Urchin with the city secrets.
Yes.
You will never lose that. You just may have risen above your station with whatever's going on, and so you're no longer classified as an urchin. You could be classified as a noble, but you're newer in the noble, so it wouldn't really be your background, it'd be what you're growing into.
Right, and it should be something that could be the complete opposite. Like maybe you
So
were
sad.
you were a paladin who was an acolyte, and that's what your background is. But now you're an oath breaker, but your background is still an acolyte, so you still have those knowledge and perks and stuff of that. It's just, does it affect who you are now? Will it come in handy? Maybe, but it's not who you are at that moment.
Yeah.
And that's something that you should definitely keep in mind. If you're like, man, this would be the perk, but the story that I'm writing doesn't match that. Like, okay, cool. That's your background. That's how your character started. That's how they gained certain knowledge sets. Just keep in mind that, moving forward, you might not be that so much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you very well could have a thing where you're like, for example, the haunted one. Maybe you stop getting haunted like halfway through your campaign. It can happen.
Unlikely.
It's unlikely, but it can happen.
Cal has the haunted one background. I don't think she'll ever not be haunted.
Okay, fine. Then the inheritor.
But-
you lose that
But
inheritance.
for example, like part of the feature of the haunted one is that people can see that you've been through a lot of struggle in your past, and so they kind of almost take pity on you, and they're willing to help you as long as you're not like inherently evil.
Mm-hmm.
But like Cal doesn't use that so much because Cal's general personality is that she hates people for the most part. So
Well,
she-
people have still done that. People
But
have still
yeah. So it's one of those things that it's like you also can use these, or you can choose not to. It's kind of, I mean, it depends on how you play.
Some of them are up to the DM to call out and use.
Yeah.
Other ones are up to active for the players to use.
Right, like for example, the folk hero is the one that I've used the most. I shouldn't say the most, but
That's the one you are.
it's the one I am. that's where you get the benefit of people could know you and get benefits from that.
And if your player doesn't give you, I was nice to you, but if your player doesn't give you a lot of information on why they're a folk hero, depending on who they go to, they're a hero to some, villain to others.
Right.
So, haha, it is I. It is the Slayer!
Right. Like, for example, you could be a folk hero to one town where you slaughter, bugbears have come and destroyed our town, and you kill the bugbears, but then you go to the next town where the bugbears are from, and they were integrated into that community. It's like, oh, you slaughtered Tom and Bill, and yeah. But this is where, for example, as far as DM interaction, there's that, as well as, I know for us, I'm not sure how always it is, when I would introduce myself, you were like, cool, and then percentile dice.
I'd roll for it.
And you would be like, how much of this town would know who you are? Or how likely this person was to know who you are? And then as a DM, you were like, okay, is that a good light, bad light? How's that going to be? Or, things like hermit. You're not going to be a hermit forever, especially if you're going to be playing.
If you're in a D&D campaign, you're kind of
Probably.
with people.
Exactly.
Or maybe that's your ultimate end goal is to get back to your hermitage.
You guys bothered me. I have to save the world.
I just
You
want to
guys
go back
bothered
to
me.
my swamp. If you want to play Shrek, you could pick a hermit.
Yeah.
Or if you want to super lean into your class, there's a few of these that super lean into classes.
Yeah.
Now you could be a rogue, swashbuckler with the pirate background.
Yeah.
You are
Yes.
literally a pirate.
Which is what I've done.
You'll never outgrow that because it's your class.
Right.
It meshes perfectly with what you are.
Yeah, sometimes that background sparks everything, because that was very much what it was for me. It's like, man, I want to make a pirate. And then that's where it was like, there's a swashbuckler rogue. There's a what? I can make a swashbuckling pirate?
Well, let me give you another background for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean you have to stick with it. Of course, you could have a pirate background, because I've done the same thing where I've picked a pirate background, but I made a fighter dragonborn.
Well, there's tons of ways to do pirates.
Right. It just depends on the type of pirate you want to be. And this is where, that's how a lot of these backgrounds work, is what kind of one of these do you want to be? Are you going to be a hermit who hates people, that wants absolute seclusion forever? Or are you a hermit that just lives by yourself because you prefer it, but you travel to town every day? Like, hi, everyone. It's like, hey, look, it's Tim the Hermit. Hi. He's going to go back up in those mountains if you need some.
There are definitely certain little things that you can do to sort of tweak these. Like maybe you're a reluctant entertainer, or maybe you're a reluctant mercenary veteran.
Your parents
adding in
forced you.
a little bit of something else to sort of tweak it and make it maybe a little bit more interesting, or a little bit more to kind of file in with what you want your backstory to be
Right.
overall. You can kind of play up to that.
I mean, or you just have it so it's almost like a double edged, like you said, like a reluctant entertainer. Maybe you were raised by a noble family who's forced you to learn the viol, and you're like, well, I don't want to. I hate it, parents. They're like, learn it. Everyone in our family knows how to do it, and maybe you're proficient in it, but you would rather be a comedian.
Yeah.
You'd rather play the fool than this proper thing. So you still have the entertainer thing.
So my mother used to tell me.
Yeah. So
Things like that.
yeah, so that's where you can use it in a number of different ways that you see ideal. Again, this is where you really are letting your imagination run wild. Or if you're looking for an NPC that you're like, okay, I need a couple of NPCs, what would they know? Something, especially if you're doing stuff like guards or something. Soldier is usually one of the first things that you can throw it into.
Or a knight if they're a higher up guard.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then that also gives them certain skills that if you're using an NPC and maybe that NPC is going to help your party in a battle or something.
It's good to have so you can roll and give them a sense that this is a real person.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know a lot of times, as a DM, I'll add backgrounds to my NPCs, and I'll give them backstories, and obviously I'd give them backstories, but I'll actually add these backgrounds, especially if there's something that sort of works perfectly for an NPC. I'll be like, yeah, you're definitely a gambler. Click.
Done.
Is Gambler one of them?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's from Acquisitions Incorporated.
Yes. Some of the source books have started integrating their own different backgrounds. So the more of the source books that you have, the wider variety of backgrounds you're gonna have.
Yes,
Yeah,
some of them, like I said, with Guildmaster's Guide, doesn't make sense if you're not using those things.
Right.
So,
But they can be inspirations.
For
other
example,
things.
the Rick and Morty one recently came out, and I think that's kind of interesting. First off, Rick and Morty in
D&D is the whole thing.
But I was just sitting there thinking, what would be some really funny Rick and Morty style backgrounds, like a space traveler, Like an
I mean,
alien
like,
that's been abandoned on another planet.
even something as simple
or-
as a scientist. I mean, because
Yeah.
you could use something like scientists, and now you have the artificers and everything,
Yeah.
but you can have it so they're just a straight up scientist as their background, and they're experimenting with all kinds of things, and then you just have that's your character, what he's used to, what he's doing. Especially those were, again, this is where as a player you can either find one that works, look for your own, or make your own. And if you have an idea, again, 9 times out of 10 you're going to find someone else who has a similar idea. So you can use that, or B, again, you have the control to build your own. As a DM, you have all that control. As a player, talk to your DM. We talk about it all the time with finding a DM that you feel comfortable talking to because of those things.
I don't want you guys to talk to me anymore.
That's why I went to Sam.
Ah!
So like I said, it was one of those things like I bring up Cliff, and I was like, I want his background to be a masonry. All it was just a quick discussion with you, and it was just like, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, you were like, yeah, I want him to be a mason. I'm like, I can do that.
Before I even gave any
Tap, 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 tap,
and
tap.
it was one of those things, especially as a DM with like you two. It was just like, here's the background I've made for you based off your idea. What do you think? Does this work for you? Does this make sense to you? Do you have any questions? And this is where it really is something like if you're a player coming up with a background and trying to integrate anything, talking to your DM and having that like kind of meld. And you have to understand sometimes that not everything is going to be as perfect, and some of it's going to come down to role playing wise.
Yeah.
So you may be like, well, I feel like I should have proficient in this thing. It's like that might be a bit broken. We'll see how it goes depending on how you role play a situation. Like if you feel that you feel that your character is a comedian, entertainer, you should get more proficiency for jokes. It's like, okay, maybe when you read the room as a role player, be able to then go, now you can roll with advantage.
Yeah.
Versus, or like, it's like you just told this joke. You told a dwarf joke in a room of dwarfs and they did not appreciate it. I am not giving you advantage here.
Make a roll initiative.
Yeah, roll for initiative instead.
That's 10 hand axes fly at you.
Evasion.
Now, keep in mind that there is a difference between your background and your backstory.
Yes.
They are kind of they're sort of with each other, but they're also exclusive on their own.
You
Like,
could have been an acolyte, and your background could be acolyte, and then you're no longer with the church.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally fine. You have the acolyte background because that's how your backstory played into it, but you're not like, that's not your backstory.
Or,
Yes.
for example, maybe at one time you were a gladiator, but that wasn't like your
That's your
whole
old life.
life.
Yes.
You know, like that wasn't like every single aspect of like what plays into how your character is built. It's just a part of it. They're like a part of it that you've chosen to like focus on.
It's kind of like when you talk to someone about their major, like after they graduate, like college and something.
Yeah.
It may have nothing to do with what they do now.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, my majored in Russian literature. What do you do now? Oh.
Boros Legionnaire now.
It's like, oh, okay. But then like something might arise because of that. Your background's that. It's like, man, what is that? It's in Russian. I know what that says. Oh.
Thanks, that's good.
That's cool. That's good to know. I didn't think you'd know that. Like, I majored in Russian literature. Oh, good to know. And this is what, like you said, like it may be one of those things. Like if you're a gladiator, but you're not a gladiator anymore, you understand a certain dialogue and how certain things work. But like you haven't been a gladiator for any length of time that your party knows you.
Right.
And you just walk up and it's like, man, what is this? It's like, oh, that's the fighting pit. Those are those guys. Those are those guys. We should probably not do that because that's seen as in poor taste. And everyone's just like,
Why do you know this?
Because your background can be one of three things in my mind. It can just be nothing. You have it, good.
like
You're
a
never going
hidden
to
skill
use it.
set for special
Yeah,
situations.
you're never going to really use it. It can be the pinnacle. It could be the main pillar of the structure of your backstory. Or it could just be like a little support beam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's really what it comes down to. Is backgrounds are part of your backstories. If you're trying, you can use it just as well as anything else. Because I know we've talked about this before. It can be anything that spark a character. Whether it's like I want to play this race, I want to play this class, I want to play this background, or I have a whole background, a backstory that I'd like to play with. It's just another one of those triggering mechanisms for imagination and creating a character.
Right.
Because no matter what point you pick the background, it's just to add to that character. If you've picked it last, you picked it first, you picked it second, it doesn't matter. It's just another thing that adds to it.
And be aware that if you let your DM pick your background,
They're going to use it.
they're going to use it.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
definitely one of those things
It's
where
like a free tool for them.
right.
You're like, oh, look at this plot device.
I mean, because with any DM, you're going to see that any part of your character that you've decided will play a role, whether it's even the smallest bit of your backstory, the background you chose, the race you chose, the class you chose. It is fuel. It's just
Fuel for the pyre that is the story of your life.
Right.
and that's very true. Like, so you may have been your background may have been pirate, but you've been living the straight and narrow for years. All it takes is that DM to go, so you were a pirate at one point, huh? Cool.
I mean, you got a tattoo. The guard's gonna look. Oh, he notices that tattoo of your mark.
Yeah, or even if it's not something as simple as that, it's just someone from your past.
You
Like
see
your
an
old
individual
ship
with one
captain.
eye.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, it's like, ooh, is it you there, Terrence? Or shall I say, Bloodbeard?
See, hacks up a lung.
He's like, oh no.
Ah, you're still alive. Dang.
See, I really like taking things and like adding like negative twists to them. So like,
yeah.
So like, I like doing things like maybe you were a pirate, but you were a really bad pirate, like to the point where they kicked you out of being a pirate. Like you were considered bad luck, and they just marooned you on an island somewhere.
Your bad reputation doesn't mean you're a bad guy. It's a bad reputation means you're a bad pirate.
Well, this is where you see a lot of it with the personality, the ideas, the bonds, and the flaws.
Yeah.
A lot of these have their owns to add to it,
Right.
and that could be very much part of the flaws. If you're making your own, that's a great one to do. Or even talking to your DM going like, hey, I'd like to add a different flaw for my character that's not one of these preset ones.
Right.
So, like, if you look at pirate and you're like, one of these isn't, like, you're a bad pirate. Like, because I forget what the ones for pirate are, of course.
They're every single one has a different one. You can either roll for it and it'll tell you what to roll, or you can pick.
Right.
And those are great for adding some flair. If you don't really know what to do with your player or your character, you can help them along or help yourself along by using that to give yourself something to add that spice to your character, so they
Right.
have something a little bit more substantial than, hi, my name's Ted, I'm a hermit, I like money, and that's it. So you can add those things and be like, I like money because of this, and or
Right.
this.
So, like, for example, like I was talking about the pirate. Like, if you go down the flaws, that you have things like, I follow orders even if I know they're wrong. I'd say anything to avoid having to do extra work. Once someone questions my courage, I never back down, no matter how dangerous the situation is. Once I start drinking, it's hard for me to stop. I can never help but pocket loose coins or other trinkets I come across, or my pride will probably lead to my destruction. If you're like, those are great flaws, but I really want my flaw to be that I am just the worst pirate ever, or I am known for being a bad pirate.
Yeah.
This is why, like, stuff like D&D Beyond, you can type in your own stuff.
Yep, and you can also have, don't limit it until you can only have one of each. You can have as many as you want.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't go crazy with it, because
No.
then it's a lot to keep track of with your DM to be like, okay, they don't like fire, but they also don't like water, and they gotta follow with this. No.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, if you're role playing it, you're going to have those things come up often enough that your DM is going to be reminded of it. Yeah, because usually when you see things like personality traits, they'll like pick two, one ideal, one flaw. And by all means, you can pick all the flaws. Just have your character be this flawed thing.
I kind of like to think this, as far as the bonds and flaws, and kind of up to your DM. Your DM can play really hard into a bond that you have. Like, I know some are like, oh, you have a mysterious lover from your past, like, or something like that. They can really play into that. Or it can just be more of a guideline to how you RP that character.
Right. It really just comes down to it. Like, for example, in your first campaign, I was playing a bugbear looking for his wife, and that his bond is that his wife and family are his reason for existing, and that was his whole story arc. Was to find his family. That was the only thing that mattered to him. That was his bond to this planet. Versus other ones are like, what's your bond? It's like, to not be a douchebag.
Yes, book.
Right. You're like, oh, I've read this book before, and I want to find this eventually. But then that's not your entire character. So it's just like, if I get a chance, I'd like to do that. It's like, it's a childhood dream of mine. It's like, okay, cool. We'll get to that when we get to that. So, yeah, I mean, backgrounds are, it's like that weird mixture of very important and could be completely meaningless depending on how you do it.
Yeah, it depends on how you build your character and how you want your character to interact and react to the world around them. So, what are some of your guys' favorite backgrounds?
I mean, I always like folk hero because I like to build characters very much like that, and that's just, of course, as you guys know, it's me. I like building heroes or villains or, characters that are usually known for something. I know for the most part, depending on what class I do, tends to fall into the background. Like if I'm building a paladin or a cleric, acolyte is always going to be very easy, or a rogue is very easy to put into the urchin, or a monk is easy to put into hermit, or a bard is an entertainer. Some of them fit really well and they just work, and everything else
easy.
And it focuses more, like for me, it's the backstory or the story I'm trying to tell with the character, and it's just like, okay, what fits best with that, and just throw a background into there.
And if it's your first time making a character, don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid, like, I'm making a bard, entertainer. Easy to keep track of.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and which is how we started with Sorn, as we talked about him and like Goliaths and just overarching with bards and nobles. It was just like the character I was building. It was like, well, folk hero would work really well for you, Tristan. It's like, you're right. That would probably be the closest thing out of these, choices that would work for a Goliath who runs around protecting people in the name of Thor. It's like, okay, he's a folk hero.
Easy peasy.
Yes.
What about you?
I personally like the charlatan.
Faker.
I like the fact that you kind of get this false identity, and especially if you play a character like a changeling, which you already get a mask. So depending on how your DM rules, you could get a mask and a false identity, or you can strengthen that mask by having that false identity. So I really like that one. I like the haunted one because if you look into that one and really look into it, there's a lot of details to it. You can get like it'll tell you how you became haunted, or like maybe you have like a gothic trinket or something like that. But I did really like the charlatan.
Another one close to that one is a new one from Descent into Avernus is Faceless.
The faceless, yeah, the faceless is
dual
good
personality, plus
Yeah.
changeling. So you're just like, I have everything.
too. Yeah, the faceless is a good one.
I'm a big old nerd.
I mean, because like a lot of these things do give you such a range of things just to even play with. Like charlatan. I mean, they have a whole like a favorite scheme table to help you pick from. If you're like, man, I'd love to play a charlatan, it's like, cool. Well, here's a list of 6 schemes if you're looking for inspiration. Like, oh, I cheat at games of chance. I shave coins or forge documents. It's like, if you're looking for inspiration for things, these backgrounds give you so much sparks of just like, it'd be great. I mean, for example, I think Kralik or Bill Bays from our Almighty 5 one-shot where we play an evil character, I'm pretty sure he has the charlatan background because of stuff like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, because especially if you're building, like, some of these are great for villain characters when you have, like, the dual personalities and stuff like that, or you have an entertainer, maybe you pick someone who has the, the mask or something, just to be able, like, well, this is my stage presence, and you're very drastically different, it's like, as a person walking around, maybe your stage persona is so different, people are confused and consider you a liar. It's like, no, that's just a performance character. So your background is maybe charlatan, but not treated as such.
So what about you, Brandon? What's your favorite?
Archaeologist.
Yeah,
All
sounds
the
about
way.
right. Yeah, I thought that was probably going to be the one you were going to mention.
I just love it. It's so like it makes your characters like you can have like such depth where like they can be like either an explorer because that's what they love and they love that stuff, or they can become a reluctant explorer. Like, I'm an archaeologist, I'm now wrapped up in this. And like you get like from my thing, you get some cool things being an archaeologist. You get history and survival. It's good to have history, especially if you're the brains of the group, and survival is always good when you're exploring. And then you have like cartographers or navigators tools, so you can be like the direction head of the group. And then a language, it's good. Like, let's say your party's missing Elvish for some reason, you now know Elvish. So then you have a nice round, and then my favorite thing is the historical knowledge, is being able to walk into a place and be like, this temple was made by the Yuan-Ti to sacrifice babies, and and then everyone goes, wait, where are we?
See, and of course, I just like it when you can use these kind of backgrounds in a different way. Like, for example, criminal. And of course, this is a very common one, especially if you're doing a rogue or something. But you could have someone have a background as a criminal, but maybe they were falsely accused, but they were imprisoned. So they were technically a criminal for a long period of time.
You scum.
But they've been completely innocent. They're good. But they still developed the skill set of a criminal. Like they know the ins and outs of prison, but only because they were forced to do it, or they've been, they've fixed their life afterwards. Like, I made a stupid mistake as a kid, but now I'm going to live the straight and narrow. But and of course, that's where your DM gets to mess with you.
Mess with that, and you can have guards be like, you need to pay your tax for coming into town, thief.
Right. So yeah, backgrounds can be anything from the most important thing that you're building a character with to something very small and throwaway.
Yeah.
But as with all of it, it's just there for inspiration to help you to pick and build a character that you enjoy playing. Whether it's for a one-shot and you just need someone like, what would you kind of have? Or you're playing a campaign and you're going to be the most RP-heavy person in the world, and you're like, what would be that background that it would have this background and skills and such to deal with?
And talk to your DM, because it wouldn't make much sense if you were an archaeologist and your DM goes, there are no ruins. What are you the archaeologist of? What ruins and temples are you going into?
Right, because a lot of times you're going to find yourself with a DM who's already built the world, and if you pick something like, and unfortunately, that doesn't exist in my world, my friend.
Like, if, just offhand example, like if you choose the Fisher background from the Ghost of Saltmarsh, and let's say you have lived in a landlocked continent your entire life and have never been near water, like...
Yeah, there's a pond.
Like
there's no fish, but there's pond.
Like that type of thing, it has to make sense.
Yeah.
So using all that, be inspired, be creative.
And as you said, talk to your DM, because chances are if you find a DM that works well for you, they probably have a couple of years of experience that they might have seen a background or know of a background that you haven't thought of, or something that just triggers in their heads like, I know it's not perfect, but I think this could work for you.
Yeah.
Or if they're just as new as you, sit down and make a chart.
Yeah, I mean, just one of those things where you talk between the two, bounce ideas off of each other. That's always a great thing as well. And I know it's not exactly pertaining to this, but bouncing ideas off of another person, whether it's a player, a friend, or a DM, is always a great option, especially for stuff like backgrounds. If you're like, I just don't know what it would be. Well, what's your story? Oh, I don't have one. Okay, well, then
Now let's make it.
Right. So that's kind of like talking about backgrounds, incorporating them, helping them build, as we're talking about background building, and kind of your overview of the things you can and can't get with backgrounds, and use them to your advantage or your disadvantage, depending on your DM.
I don't know why you're looking at me.
So until next time, D10tion dismissed.